At nearly 1 in the morning, with rain dragging thin silver lines down the windows of their Asheville apartment, and the refrigerator humming with the tired steadiness of a machine that had witnessed too many silences, Marisol Keene stood barefoot in the bedroom with a gray suitcase open on the floor, and the terrible feeling that she had done this before, not exactly this, not with the same sweater folded beside the same toiletry bag, and the same blue dress lying across the bed like an accusation, but the emotional shape of it was familiar enough to make her hands feel old. The blue dress was the one she had worn to the first children's art exhibition Dorian Vale had promised to attend and missed, the one with the narrow waist and soft sleeves that made her feel graceful until she had spent the whole evening checking the door every few minutes, smiling at parents, kneeling beside children, thanking donors, adjusting crooked name cards, and pretending the empty space beside the refreshment table was not meant for the man she loved. Now the dress sat half-folded near the suitcase, and Marisol kept touching it as if fabric could explain how many versions of herself had been left waiting in rooms. Dorian entered only after the damage was done. Her phone lit up on the bed again, the glow washing over the rumpled sheets, the sweater, the folded jeans, the small cloth pouch of earrings she had bought from a local artist at the center's holiday market. 17 missed calls, 11 messages, all from Dorian, who had spent the previous week reading her texts without answering, who had ignored the message where she wrote, "I am very tired and I need us to talk before I start feeling like I am disappearing in this relationship," who had left her voice note unopened for 3 days, who had replied to a photo she sent from work with a single gray heart and nothing else. Now the screen would not stay dark. "Please pick up. Mari, I'm sorry, where are you going? Don't do this like this. Please don't disappear on me." That last line made her laugh once, not because it was funny, but because the cruelty of timing sometimes became too precise to bear. "Don't disappear on me," as though disappearance were a thing she had invented that night, not a slow weather he had trained her to survive, as though she had not spent years becoming smaller beside him, quieter in restaurants, gentler in arguments, easier to postpone, easier to reassure, easier to win back with beauty after neglect had made her hungry enough to mistake crumbs for a feast. The doorbell rang just as she was closing the zipper over her toiletries, and the sound went through the apartment like a hand on bone. She stood still, listening. It rang again. Not frantic, not held down, just once more, patient and devastating, the way Dorian could be when he had finally decided to be present. Marisol walked down the short hallway past the framed print from the Community Arts Center, past the narrow shelf where she kept allergy medicine for him, because spring pollen made his eyes swell, past the hook where his spare jacket still hung, though he had not been home before midnight all week, past the small dish by the door where he always dropped his keys when he remembered to come home before she went to bed. When she opened the door, Dorian was not there. A bouquet of white flowers sat on the mat wrapped in brown paper darkened by rain, the stems angled carefully, as if someone had placed them down with both hands and then stepped back before facing what they meant. White ranunculus, lisianthus, 2 pale roses, eucalyptus leaves. Ione would have recognized the arrangement immediately, and said it was the kind of bouquet men bought when they wanted softness to do the speaking they had avoided. A small card was tucked between the stems. Marisol opened it with wet fingers. "Please don't disappear on me." No signature. Dorian never signed cards when he wanted intimacy to feel obvious. She stood in the doorway with rain misting her ankles and the bouquet bright as a ghost at her feet, and for one long second the old reflex inside her rose up with horrifying strength. "Pick up the flowers, call him. Let this mean something. Let this be the proof that he loves you. Let the suitcase stay open one more night. Let the fact that he came close to losing you become the beginning of a new version." She had lived years inside that reflex. It had the voice of hope and the logic of addiction. But behind her the suitcase waited, the blue dress waited. The apartment waited with all the objects she had bought to make a shared life softer for a man who only seemed to touch softness when it was leaving him. The kitchen waited with 2 mugs in the sink because she had drunk tea alone that morning and left his untouched, as if a ceramic cup could remain loyal after the person it was meant for forgot to appear. The couch waited with the indentation of his body from nights he sat beside her without being with her. The dining table waited with a stack of unopened mail, his landscape sketches, her grant notes, and the bowl of oranges she kept buying even though he was the one who ate them, and he had not noticed when she stopped peeling one for him after dinner. Marisol did not bring the flowers inside. Not yet. She stood there until the hallway light flickered off, until the rain soaked the edge of the card, until the phone behind her began ringing again, and only then did she understand that the most dangerous kind of love was not always the one that never came. Sometimes it came beautifully, desperately, almost perfectly, but always after it had first taught a person how to bleed. 7 years earlier, Marisol had met Dorian Vale in the community arts garden behind the old brick building on Clingman Avenue, where the center had received a small grant to turn a neglected strip of packed dirt and weeds into an outdoor classroom for children who needed color, dirt, sunlight, and a place where no one hurried them. Marisol was 28 then, still wearing her hair shorter, still carrying too many clipboards, still believing the right amount of work could make fragile things survive. She coordinated youth programs at the center, which meant she spent her days writing grant proposals at midnight, calling parents who had changed numbers twice in 1 year, buying washable paint with coupons, arranging bus vouchers, soothing volunteer egos, cleaning glitter from tile floors, and convincing children who had been told art was extra that their drawings were worth wall space. She had a talent for making fragile programs look stable, which meant donors shook her hand and praised her passion without knowing that she sometimes paid for snacks herself, that she kept a spreadsheet of which child needed a ride home, and which child should not be sent home with a flyer because paper disappeared in their house, that she knew which parent hated phone calls but answered texts, which child hid under tables when voices got loud, which volunteer wanted praise more than usefulness. Dorian arrived as the landscape architect hired on a reduced fee after the original designer backed out. He was 31, quiet, lean, with careful hands and a habit of pausing before answering, as if words had to be measured for weight before they were allowed into the world. Marisol first noticed him kneeling near the broken fence, turning a piece of soil between his fingers, not grimacing at the trash, not making jokes about the mess. When she apologized for the state of the garden, he looked up and said, "It is not a mess. It is a place nobody has listened to yet." She remembered that sentence because it sounded like something she believed but had never said so beautifully. In the weeks that followed, Dorian became part of the project in quiet ways that felt like depth. He remembered she preferred peppermint tea over coffee after noon because coffee made her hands shake. He noticed one boy who always sat away from the others, and designed a small bench beneath the old oak, tucked far enough from the main path that a child could sit there without being stared at. When rain surprised them one afternoon, he held an umbrella over Marisol's head while letting his own shoulder get soaked, and when she protested he said, "You still have a meeting, I only have mud." It was not grand romance, it was attention. Attention was what Marisol trusted most. A person who saw small things, she thought, would not miss the large ones. Their first conversations happened in fragments between deliveries of mulch, volunteer weekends, and children pressing painted handprints onto stepping stones. Dorian did not flirt in obvious ways. He watched the children move through the garden, and asked why one little girl never used yellow paint. He noticed Marisol skipped lunch on program days, and left a wrapped sandwich on the supply table, without saying he had bought it for her. He drew a curved pathway instead of a straight one, because she said some children needed time to arrive. That sentence, too, he remembered. Their first year together was built from that kind of quiet seeing. Dorian would sketch ideas on napkins while she talked about program schedules. He learned the names of the children whose art she mentioned most often. He made her a narrow planter box for the apartment balcony because she said city living made her miss the smell of basil in summer. He did not talk much about his family, only that his parents had separated without ever fully saying why, and that the Vale household had been quiet in a way that made every sound feel like a mistake. Marisol loved him for trusting her with even that much. She told herself that silence in him was not emptiness but protection, that if she was patient, if she was gentle, if she did not force him open, love would teach him that closeness did not have to hurt. The first change came so slowly she gave it kinder names. He became busy, then preoccupied, then distant, though she rarely used that word aloud. He stopped asking about her programs unless she offered the information first. He answered texts hours later, not with cruelty but with minimal warmth. "Long day. Sorry. We'll call later." And then later became tomorrow, and tomorrow became a weekend in which he slept late, worked on designs, or drove to job sites without inviting her. When she brought it up, he would listen with his brow furrowed, looking almost wounded by her loneliness, and say, "I am trying. You know I am not good at this stuff." She did know. Knowing became the rope she used to tie herself to him. At their third anniversary dinner she cooked mushroom risotto because he loved it. lit 2 candles, and wore a gold necklace he had once said made her look like late afternoon. Dorian did not come home until nearly 11. He had stayed at a landscape installation site because the lighting subcontractor made a mistake, and then gone for drinks with the crew to decompress. He texted at 9:18, "Sorry, long day." When he walked in, Marisol was sitting at the table with 2 plates gone stiff and a candle burned almost to nothing. He looked genuinely sorry but tired, and that tiredness did something cruel to the apology before it left him. "Mari, I lost track," he said. "I am sorry. I didn't mean to make it a thing." She looked at him, and some part of her, a part not yet trained to negotiate with neglect, stood up. She took her coat from the chair and said she was going to Ion's for the night. That was the first time she saw it happen. Dorian's whole face changed, the fatigue vanished, his eyes sharpened. He stepped toward her as if the floor had shifted. "Wait," she said. She needed space. He said her name again, not casually, not with the distant softness he used when half listening, but with urgency. He pulled out the chair, sat down at the cold meal, took one bite as if eating it could undo the evening, then stood and wrapped his arms around her from behind, while she held her coat against her chest. "I did not know I could make you feel that alone," he whispered, his voice cracking in a way that went straight through her anger. "Please stay, please, I will do better." That night he washed the dishes, relit the candles, warmed the risotto badly, sat across from her until after 3 in the morning, and told her things about his childhood he had never said before. How his father, Gideon, would come home and disappear into his study, while his mother moved through the house, pretending this was marriage. How no one shouted, so no one outside knew anything was wrong. How he learned not to knead too loudly because kneading made a person ridiculous. Marisol cried with him. She believed they had touched the root. The next morning, he made coffee and kissed her shoulder, and for 2 weeks he was everything she had needed. He called when he said he would. He asked about work. He took her to the garden center and bought herbs for the balcony. He held her hand while walking downtown. Marisol thought love had been frightened awake. She did not yet know fear could imitate love so well that even the starving heart could not tell the difference. Ione Mercer saw the bouquets before Marisol saw the pattern. Ione owned a flower shop on a side street near the art center, a narrow, fragrant place with buckets of stems along the walls, eucalyptus hanging upside down to dry, and a back counter always dusted with soil, ribbon scraps, and little leaves that clung to sleeves. She and Marisol had been friends long enough for honesty to become less optional, though honesty between friends still had timing, pressure, and grief in it. After the 3rd anniversary near breakup, Marisol came in holding a bundle of peach roses Dorian had sent to the center with a card that said, "I am learning." She placed them on Ione's counter like evidence in favor of hope. Ione touched one rose not unkindly. "They are beautiful," she said. Marisol heard the missing sentence. "But?" Ione looked up. "Does he love you on ordinary Tuesdays or mostly on nights when you are about to leave?" Marisol pulled back as if her friend had touched a bruise. "That is not fair." Ione nodded, accepting the accusation without surrendering the point. "Maybe not, I just know flowers. Some are planted, some are cut and handed over when someone needs the room to smell better for a while." Marisol hated that, so she defended him. She said Dorian was complicated, not careless. She said he had old wounds, that he was not fluent in affection, that he was trying in the only language he had. Ione listened, wrapping the flower stems again, and finally said, "Not being fluent is different from speaking only when silence starts costing him." Marisol left with the roses and a tightness in her chest that she called irritation because fear was not yet available to her. The years became a series of cycles, each one different enough in detail that she could pretend it was not the same wound. After the anniversary, there was the winter when Dorian forgot the dinner with her closest friends from the center. A dinner planned weeks in advance because everyone's schedules were impossible. Marisol sat through the meal alone, laughing too brightly, telling Callum Price and 2 other colleagues that Dorian's project deadline had exploded, though in truth he had texted only, "Can't make it," exhausted. Later, when she came home and told him how embarrassing it had been, he rubbed his eyes and said, "I thought you understood what this deadline was like." The sentence made her feel selfish, so she apologized for being sharp. 2 days later, when she barely spoke, he appeared at the center with coffee for the staff and helped move tables for a children's mural workshop. Everyone liked him. Children liked him, especially because he was quiet and drew trees in the margins of their papers. Marisol watched him kneel beside a little girl and show her how to shade leaves, and she felt the familiar warmth of rescue. "See," she told herself, "he is here." Then spring came and he forgot again. There was the summer he cancelled accompanying her to a medical appointment, after a strange lump appeared near her collarbone, saying he had a sight visit he could not move. It turned out benign, but she sat in the waiting room alone under fluorescent light, surrounded by old magazines and women tapping their feet, and when she told him that night she had been scared, he looked stricken. "Why didn't you tell me it mattered that much?" She stared at him. "I said biopsy." He brought soup the next day, took off work, lay beside her on the couch, and stroked her hair until she almost forgot the waiting room. There was the fall he did not answer, calls the night her mother's furnace failed in another town, and Marisol spent 3 hours arranging repairs, worrying about money, wanting the simple comfort of hearing his voice. He sent flowers afterward, not cheap ones, white tulips that opened slowly on her desk, beautiful enough that coworkers said she was lucky. Every apology became a short season of tenderness. Dorian in those seasons was devastating. He became attentive in ways so specific that they felt like proof he had been listening all along. He remembered the exact brand of oat milk she liked. He left notes on the bathroom mirror. He asked about the child at the center, who had painted a red house with no door. He put his phone face down at dinner. He touched the back of her neck when they crossed streets, a gesture that made her body remember safety before her mind could object. Those days were real. That was what made them poisonous. If he had never been tender, leaving would have been easier. Instead, he gave her enough evidence to keep retrying the trial. Every time she nearly convicted the relationship of being empty, Dorian entered with flowers, tears, a trip, a confession, a weekend in which he loved her like a man who had finally understood the shape of her heart. Then, once she softened, once the suitcase was unpacked, once the danger passed, he faded. Not brutally, quietly. The texts shortened, the questions stopped, work grew urgent, conversations became things to postpone, and Marisol, ashamed of needing another rescue, learned to ask for less. Less time, less reply, less witness, less ordinary love. She learned to send one message instead of 3, then none. She learned to tell herself that a man could love deeply and still forget to ask how her day had been. She learned that if she said, "I feel lonely," he might become sad enough to require comfort, and then she would be holding his shame instead of her loneliness. She learned that if she waited long enough, his guilt would turn sweet, and sweetness was easier to live on than truth for a while. At the Community Arts Center, Callum Price did not rescue anyone spectacularly, which was exactly why his presence unsettled Marisol. Callum was a single father who coordinated maintenance grants and after-school logistics, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, a gentle voice, and a way of doing what he said that seemed almost radical beside Dorian's cycles of absence and arrival. If Callum said he would bring the ladder at 4, the ladder was there at 3:55. If he could not make a meeting, he emailed before anyone had to wonder. He did not over-apologize. He did not dramatize basic reliability. He simply understood that other people built their plans around his word. During the Winter Children's Exhibition, Marisol and Callum spent 3 evenings hanging small framed drawings along the gallery walls, while rain tapped the high windows. Dorian had promised to help with the garden installation for the entrance, a temporary arrangement of branches, moss, and lanterns meant to make the building feel magical for the children walking in. He had designed it on paper and then vanished into client deadlines, sending suggestions by text instead of arriving. Callum, seeing Marisol on a ladder with a roll of fishing line between her teeth, said, "I can stay another hour." She immediately said he did not have to. He answered, "I know, I said I can." That ordinary sentence moved something in her she did not want moved. Later, when she apologized for changing a meeting time because a parent had come in crying over a housing notice, Callum said, "No problem. I just need to know before I arrange pickup for my son." No punishment in his voice, no sigh, no hidden invoice for flexibility. Marisol felt heat behind her eyes and turned away under the pretense of sorting labels. It was not attraction, though Callum was kind and steady and observant. It was grief. She was grieving the discovery that coordination did not have to be begged for. She was grieving how little she had mistaken for too much. Dorian missed that exhibition. He texted near the end, "Client dinner ran over. Proud of you." The words appeared on her phone while she stood beneath strings of warm lights, surrounded by children pointing at their paintings, parents taking photos, the smell of acrylic and cookies in the air. Proud of you, from a distance. Proud of the version of her that could manage being alone. Marisol put the phone in her pocket and kept smiling because children were watching. After everyone left, Callum helped scrape tape from the floor. He did not ask where Dorian was. That restraint, too, felt like kindness. Marisol went home after midnight with aching feet and glitter stuck to the cuff of her black pants. Dorian was awake, sitting on the couch with his laptop. When she came in, he looked up with a soft, guilty face. How was it? She stood by the door, coat still on. You missed it. He closed the laptop slowly. I know. I am sorry. The dinner was supposed to end by 8. You designed the entrance. I know. Children walked under it tonight. Parents took pictures. Donors asked who made it. I said your name. His face tightened with shame. You did not have to do that. I know. The answer landed harder than she expected. He stood. Mari. She shook her head. Do not marry me right now. The next day, flowers arrived, yellow roses this time, with a card that said, I should have been there. Ione saw them on Marisol's desk when she came by to donate leftover arrangements from a wedding. She read the card, then looked at Marisol. Flowers cannot sit in an empty chair. Marisol should have been angry. Instead, she said very quietly, I know. That evening, at dinner with friends, someone mentioned the exhibition and Dorian, looking appropriately remorseful, said work had been impossible but he had sent flowers because he was proud of her. A woman across the table smiled and said, That is sweet, though, at least he makes up for it. Marisol watched ice melt in her glass and heard herself say before she could stop it, Flowers cannot sit in an empty chair. The table went still. Dorian's hand froze near his fork. Ione did not look surprised. On the drive home, Dorian kept both hands on the wheel and stared ahead. You embarrassed me, he said. Marisol looked out at the wet road. I told the truth. In front of our friends. You were absent in front of me. His jaw tightened. That is not the same. No, she said. It is worse only when someone sees it. He pulled into the apartment parking lot and turned off the engine. In the dark car his voice softened, which was always when danger became hardest to name. I am trying, Marisol. I sent the flowers because I knew I hurt you. Why is nothing enough? She felt the old guilt rise. It came automatically, like a system trained to protect him. Because enough would have been you standing beside me before I had to learn how to explain your absence beautifully. He did not answer. For once, she did not fill the silence. Inside the apartment he did what he had done many times before. Not with calculation exactly, but with instinct sharpened by years of being forgiven at the edge. He made tea. He asked if she wanted to sit. He said he had been selfish, that work had swallowed him, that he could see the look on her face at dinner and hated himself for causing it. He did not say, I am sorry I missed the exhibition because I decided my client dinner mattered more. He said, I hate that I hurt you. The difference was small enough that most people would call it tenderness. Marisol heard for the first time how his apologies often moved toward his feeling about her pain faster than toward the decision that caused it. Still, when he sat beside her and put his head in his hands, she touched his shoulder. She hated herself for it, and did it anyway. After the exhibition, Marisol began seeing Dr. Lenora Pike in a low brick office where the waiting room smelled of mint tea, old paper, and rain-damp wool. She told herself therapy was not because she was leaving. It was because she wanted to stop feeling crazy. Lenora did not push conclusions. She was a woman in her 60s with calm eyes and a habit of letting silence become uncomfortable enough to reveal what words were avoiding. In their first session, Marisol explained Dorian as if presenting a grant application for a difficult but worthy project. He loved her. He had childhood wounds. He did not mean harm. He could be very tender. He had come through many times, maybe not when she wanted, but eventually. Lenora listened and said, Draw the timeline. Marisol frowned. Of what? Of the times he changed. Marisol almost laughed because the request sounded too simple for something that had consumed years of her life. But Lenora handed her a sheet of paper, and Marisol began. Anniversary dinner. After she tried to sleep at Ione's medical appointment. After she stopped speaking. Mother's birthday. After she booked the hotel exhibition. After she said the empty chair line. She kept writing. The Blue Ridge Parkway trip. The couple's therapy email he filled out after she removed their photo from her desk. The week of perfect mornings after she stopped saying, I love you first. The long voice message after he found the hotel receipt from a night she had not used the room because he had arrived in the lobby with an overnight bag and a face full of fear. When she finished, the page looked less like a love story than a seismograph. Peaks of affection all after rupture. Dorian's tenderness did not precede her pain. It followed the thread of consequence. Marisol stared at the paper until the office seemed to tilt slightly. It looks worse written down, she said. Lenora's voice was gentle. Patterns often do. Marisol defended him because defense had become part of her nervous system. She told Lenora about Gideon, Dorian's father, and the Silent Vale household where emotions were treated like leaks that lowered property value. She said Dorian had never learned ordinary closeness. Lenora nodded. A wound can explain a pattern. It does not make you responsible for bleeding inside it. Marisol cried then. Not loudly, not with relief, but with the shock of hearing a sentence that did not ask her to hold both sides. When she told Dorian she had started therapy, he was quiet for a long time. They were in the kitchen, his hands still wet from rinsing a mug. "Do you talk about me?" he asked. She said yes. "That makes me feel exposed." She almost apologized. Instead she said, "I feel exposed in this relationship most days." He looked wounded. "I am not your enemy, I know. Then why does it feel like you are building a case?" Marisol thought of the timeline folded in her bag. "Maybe because I have been living like a witness without being allowed to testify." He did not like that. Later that night, he told her more about his childhood. About Gideon sitting in the den with the door open but emotionally locked. About his mother moving quietly so disappointment would not notice her. About Tessa, his sister, learning to become loud enough to survive while Dorian became still. The story was true. Marisol felt its truth. She sat beside him on the couch and held his hand while he spoke. But when he ended by saying, "You know, I was not taught how to love normally," something in her did not soften the way it once had. "I know," she said, "but I cannot keep getting hurt so you can discover the lesson." Dorian pulled his hand away. Not sharply, just enough. "That sounds like something your therapist would say. Maybe she is helping me stop saying only things that protect you." He looked at her as if she had betrayed a private agreement. The next week, Marisol traveled to Raleigh for a community arts conference and met Tessa Vale for coffee before driving home. Tessa had Dorian's watchful eyes, but none of his smooth withdrawal. She worked as a veterinarian and had the brisk tenderness of someone accustomed to animals that bit when frightened. Marisol did not intend to reveal too much, but Tessa asked one careful question, then another, and soon Marisol was describing the pattern without calling it that. Tessa listened, her face tightening with recognition. "Dorian only shows up when absence starts having consequences," she said. Marisol looked up. Tessa stirred her coffee, though she had not added sugar. "When Mom had surgery, he came because I told him I would stop calling him if he didn't. When I needed help after my divorce, he sent a check first. He came in person after I left him a message saying I was done pretending he was just busy." Marisol swallowed. "So it is not me." Tessa's face softened. "No, and also, Mari, you are not special enough to cure it." The sentence was brutal and merciful at once. Tessa reached across the table and touched her wrist. "I say that with love. He can love people, I know he can. But he does not maintain connection. He responds to alarms." Driving back through the mountains, Marisol cried so hard she had to pull into a gas station outside Black Mountain and sit with both hands on the wheel. The highway kept moving. Rain ticked on the windshield. A truck pulled in beside her, then left. She thought about alarms, about how long she had been setting herself on fire just to make enough smoke. She thought of Dorian's face each time she almost left, how awake he became, how vivid, how suddenly capable of saying the exact thing she had begged to hear in gentler moments. She thought of how humiliating it was to realize that her pain had to become dangerous before it became legible. By the time she reached Asheville, the mountains were black silhouettes against the evening, and she had stopped crying, but the silence in her car felt different. It was not the old silence of endurance. It was the silence after a diagnosis. The box began in the back of the closet beneath winter boots and a broken humidifier. Marisol did not call it a leaving box at first. She called it organization. She placed inside her passport, birth certificate, a folder of medical papers, the photo of her mother laughing on a beach, 2 books she would not want to lose, the green scarf Ione had knitted after Marisol's father died, and eventually the spare apartment key she had once given Ione, just in case. Each time Dorian had a tender week, she pushed the box deeper into the closet. Each time he faded again, she pulled it forward. The box became a private weather instrument. In calm weeks, hidden. In drought, visible. After the timeline session, Lenora suggested Marisol record voice notes, not for Dorian, not to send, but for herself after each emotional shift. "Your memory gets generous when he becomes kind," Lenora said. "Let the version of you who was hurt speak to the version of you who is hopeful." At first, Marisol felt silly whispering into her phone in the car outside the center, but soon the recordings became anchors. After Blue Ridge Parkway, where Dorian had taken her after she booked a hotel room alone because he forgot her mother's birthday dinner, her voice said, "I want to believe this trip means he understands. He drove through fog with one hand on my knee. He bought me coffee in the paper cup I like. He looked at leaves with me. I feel loved. I also feel afraid because I had to make a reservation somewhere else to get here." After the exhibition, her voice was thinner. "He sent yellow flowers. Everyone thinks that is sweet. I feel like I am being asked to eat the receipt for a meal I never got. After Dorian discovered she had removed their framed photo from her desk at work and responded by cooking every night for a week, she recorded, "He is being wonderful. I hate that I distrust wonderful now." The recordings were hard to hear, especially when Dorian was in one of his luminous phases, but they kept the timeline from dissolving under the heat of his attention. Then he found the box. It happened on a Sunday afternoon when Marisol was at the center overseeing a student mural, and Dorian decided to clean the bedroom closet, an act so out of character that later she would wonder whether some part of him had sensed the shift before he saw the proof. When she came home, the box was on the bed. Dorian stood beside it, pale, holding the green scarf. "What is this?" She set her bag down slowly. "My things? Your passport? Medical papers? The spare key?" He lifted the folder as if it were evidence against her. "Were you going to leave without telling me?" Marisol felt a strange calm enter her. Not because she was calm, but because the scene was so familiar from the other side. He was frightened now. The alarm had sounded. "I did not know when I would leave," she said. "I only knew I needed to know I could." Dorian sat down on the bed as if his knees had weakened. How long? She did not answer immediately. The answer was not a date, it was a collection of evenings, missed calls, closed doors, flowers, long enough. What followed was the most beautiful month of their relationship, and therefore the cruelest. Dorian took a day off work. He cleaned the apartment not superficially but deeply, scrubbing the stove, washing windows, folding laundry without asking where things went. He made tomato soup because she once said it tasted like childhood. He called Ione and asked what Marisol needed, and Ione, to her credit, told him she was not going to teach him how to keep what he had neglected, then still said, "Start by not making your fear her responsibility." He ordered the reading chair Marisol had loved at a thrift store 2 years earlier, and not bought because Dorian said the apartment was too full. He scheduled couples therapy and put the sessions into his calendar before showing her. He left his phone in another room during dinner. He asked questions and waited for the answer. He cried in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, saying he knew he had been absent, knew fear made him selfish, knew he did not want to become his father, knew he loved her. It was everything. It was too late to be everything. Marisol watched him move through the apartment like a man finally awake in a house already on fire, and her grief became almost unbearable because now she could see he had always had hands. He had always known how to rinse a bowl, send a message, ask a question, call a therapist, sit through discomfort. He had not lacked capacity. He had lacked urgency while she was still intact. In couples therapy, the counselor asked him, "Do you want to change because Marisol is in pain or because Marisol may leave?" Dorian held Marisol's hand. His palm was warm and trembling. "Both," he said. The counselor waited. "If she promised today that she would stay for the next year, would you continue this level of effort for 6 months without the threat of losing her?" Dorian opened his mouth, closed it. Marisol felt the silence like a door locking from the inside. He finally said, "I want to believe I would, not yes, not I would, want to believe." That night, Marisol recorded a voice note from the bathroom floor while Dorian slept. "He is trying. He is really trying, I can see it. But I think his love needs emergency to become visible. I do not know how to live as someone else's emergency forever." She replayed it once, then deleted the replay from her mind and kept the file. In bed, Dorian reached for her in his sleep, his arm warm across her waist, and she lay awake under the weight of him, crying soundlessly because the body can still want comfort from the same person the soul is preparing to leave. She gave him 3 months because part of her still wanted the story to end in repair, and because leaving a person who has never tried is one kind of grief, while leaving a person who is finally trying is another, sharper grief that makes the leaving person look cruel even to herself. She told him clearly, with Lenora's help and with the timeline in her lap, what she needed. Not flowers, not trips, not declarations made from panic. 3 months of ordinary consistency. Come to therapy. Ask about her day before she became quiet. Tell her when he needed space instead of vanishing into it. Keep small promises. Show up to the center when he said he would. Learn to remain when conflict was boring, repetitive, uncomfortable, and unrewarded by dramatic reconciliation. Dorian agreed with an intensity that frightened her. The first 2 weeks were almost peaceful. He came to therapy. He asked about grant deadlines. He helped carry paint supplies into the center without making it a performance. He met Callum and did not become cold afterward. He texted if a meeting ran late. Marisol wrote in her notebook, "He is here." She did not know whether the sentence was hope or surveillance. The 3rd week, he missed a dinner with Ione because a client presentation went long. He did text beforehand, which was new, but the text came 30 minutes after he was already late. When Marisol pointed that out, he looked pained. I thought the important part was that I told you. The important part was not making me wait to find out. He nodded, apologized, recovered. The 4th week, he skipped a therapy assignment because he said writing about his childhood left him raw and he needed a break. Marisol said needing a break was fine, but he had to say that before the session, not during it. He stared at her. Sometimes I feel like I am being graded. She felt the old guilt stir, weaker now but still alive. I am not grading you. I am trying to know whether I can live here. Here as in the apartment? Here as in us. The 5th week he began to tire, not obviously, just enough. He asked fewer questions. He sighed before difficult conversations. He said once, I feel like every normal mistake becomes evidence. Marisol wrote that sentence in her notebook and underlined normal. The 6th week, he forgot the date of a community garden meeting, where he had promised to help repair the bench he had designed years earlier. Callum and 2 volunteers fixed it. Instead, Dorian arrived after they finished, breathless, apologetic, holding coffee for everyone as if caffeine could fill the gap. Children had already painted small suns along the bench legs. Marisol looked at him standing beside the thing he had made and failed to maintain, and the symbolism was so cruel she almost laughed. That night he said, You are looking at me like I failed a final exam, she answered. No, I am looking at the pattern continuing after you promised me it would not. He rubbed his forehead. I cannot live under constant suspicion. I cannot live under constant almost. He slept on the couch, not because she asked him to but because distance allowed him to feel injured. In the morning he made coffee and acted gentle, but the air had changed. Marisol knew then, not as an emotion but as fact, that if she stayed, the cycle would become more sophisticated. Dorian would improve after bigger alarms, fail in smaller ways, resent the accounting, call her guarded, and eventually she would become the woman who could not accept love because she remembered too clearly what neglect cost. So she rented a studio near the center. She did not announce it during a fight. She did not pack in front of him to provoke fear. She signed the lease on a rainy Tuesday after work, standing under the awning of the leasing office with the keys in her palm, feeling neither free nor brave, only tired enough to act without drama. For 2 weeks she moved small boxes while Dorian was at job sites. Books first, winter clothes, her mother's photo, art supplies, the green scarf, the voice notes backed up to a drive, the reading chair, because it had been returned to her too late by him, but still belonged to her. She moved things so gradually that the apartment became a body losing blood without anyone noticing, until the face had already gone pale. A shelf looked emptier. A drawer closed more easily. Her side of the closet began to show the wall. Dorian noticed small things and dismissed them because no alarm had sounded yet. Where is the blue mug? He asked once. She said she had taken it to work. You are taking a lot to work lately. She answered, I need my things near me. He did not understand that sentence until the evening he walked in and saw the bookshelf half empty, the chair gone, the spare key placed on the kitchen table beside a folded list of utilities. He stood very still. No, he said, not loudly. Mari, no. His panic was immediate and total. This was the Dorian who could love beautifully. The Dorian who crossed the room, who took her hands, who cried openly, who said every sentence she had ever needed. He had already called Lenora for a referral to his own therapist. He had scheduled weekly sessions. He had written a letter to Gideon he wanted to read aloud. He had spoken to Tessa. He would reduce his workload. He would repair the bench again. He would come to every exhibition. He understood now. He loved her. He had been terrified, selfish, trained by silence, but he understood. He knelt beside the boxes, not in a proposal but in surrender, and the sight nearly broke her because she knew he meant it in that moment. Marisol cried with him. She did not stand coldly above his pain. She sat on the floor across from him, surrounded by cardboard, and let herself remember all of it. The garden, the umbrella, the bench under the oak, the risotto at 3 a.m. after he finally saw her, the Blue Ridge fog, his hand on her neck, the way he drew trees for children, the way his face softened when he was not hiding from himself. I can do it, he said. I know I can. I know I am late, but I can do it. Marisol wiped her face. I believe you can. Hope flashed in him so quickly it was painful. Then stay. She shook her head. I believe you can love me when you are afraid. He stared at her. That is not fair, maybe not, but it is true. He reached for her again. I am afraid because I love you, and I have been living inside your fear like it was proof. Her voice broke. Dorian, I do not want to have to be half gone every few months, so you remember I am still here. He had no answer. For the first time, his silence had no power. It did not end the conversation, did not make her comfort him, did not pull her back into translation. It simply sat between them, exposed and empty. He asked if there was someone else, not because he truly believed there was, but because the mind under threat will often search for a cleaner villain than itself. She said no. He asked if it was Callum. She said no again, more tired than angry. There does not have to be another man for a woman to stop surviving one. Dorian flinched as if she had struck him. I am not my father. No, she said. You are not, but I was starting to become your mother. That was the sentence that broke him. He put his face in his hands and made a sound she had never heard from him before. Not a sob exactly, but a body folding around a truth too late to avoid. Marisol reached toward him without thinking, then stopped. Her hand hovered in the air between them, full of 7 years of reflex, and then she lowered it into her own lap. Marisol left the next morning before sunrise, not because she wanted to be theatrical, but because the quiet hour made logistics possible. The studio smelled of fresh paint, dust, and old pipes. It was smaller than she remembered from the tour, with a narrow kitchenette, thin walls, and one window looking down at an alley where ivy climbed a brick wall in stubborn green lines. Ione arrived with coffee, not flowers. Callum came later with a borrowed dolly and carried boxes without offering commentary or symbolic rescue. He put each box where Marisol pointed, tightened one loose table leg, and left before his presence could become a story she was not ready for. When Marisol handed Ione the spare key to the old apartment, the one Ione had once called the running key, Ione closed her fingers around it and did not smile. The flower shop smelled of wet leaves and peonies that day, and for a moment Marisol hated every beautiful arrangement in the room because beauty had been used too often as a bandage over absence. Ione hugged her and said into her hair, I wish you had been loved before you had to learn how to leave. Marisol did not answer because there was no answer that would not become sobbing. The months after leaving were not triumphant. Dorian did not become a villain after losing her, which made the grief more complicated. He did not rage. He did not smear her to friends, at least not in ways that reached her. He sent messages for several weeks, each one gentler than the last, then fewer after she asked for space. He continued therapy. Tessa wrote once to say he had come to Raleigh and stayed through an entire hard conversation without shutting down. Marisol was glad and devastated. Friends divided themselves into categories without being asked. Some said she was strong. Some said if he was finally changing, maybe love deserved another chance. Some said nothing because her pain was too subtle for easy support. At the center she worked. Children painted. Grants came due. The bench under the oak held 2 coats of new sealant, repaired by Callum and volunteers. It did not replace Dorian. Nothing replaced Dorian. That was the part people did not understand. Leaving did not erase wanting. She missed him when rain started because rain belonged to their beginning. She missed him when she drank peppermint tea. She missed him when she saw a landscape drawing pinned in a cafe. She missed the specific warmth of being known by someone who had once noticed. She pretended not to shiver, but the voice notes remained, the timeline remained. Her body, slowly, began to understand that missing him was not an instruction. In the studio, loneliness had a different texture. It was honest, which did not make it gentle. Pipes knocked at night. The heater clicked too loudly. The window leaked cold air around the frame. There were evenings when she ate cereal standing at the counter, because sitting at the small table felt too formal for one person. And then she would remember all the dinners where she had sat across from Dorian and still felt alone, and the comparison would not comfort her as much as exhaust her. She cried in strange moments, while buying toothpaste, while seeing a man hold an umbrella over a woman outside a coffee shop, while finding one of Dorian's old pencils in the bottom of her bag. Lenora told her grief after a patterned relationship often came in waves of doubt because the nervous system still expected the next rescue. Your body is waiting for him to become wonderful, Lenora said. Let it wait without obeying it. Marisol listened to her own voice notes on the nights she wanted to call him. She listened to the version of herself after the exhibition, after the hotel, after the box, and each time she felt cruel for using her own pain against hope, then grateful that some past version of her had left the truth where future loneliness could find it. A year later, Marisol came home from the center carrying a folder of children's drawings and found a letter from Dorian in her mailbox. Handwritten. No flowers. No package. No performance. She stood by the small kitchen counter for a long time before opening it. He wrote that therapy had taught him things he wished he had known before they became wreckage. He wrote that he had loved her most visibly when she was nearly gone, because fear had been the only language strong enough to move him, and that he was ashamed of making her endurance into an alarm clock for his love. He wrote, I am sorry I made you disappear in pieces before I knew how to look for you. Marisol sat on the floor and cried, Not because the letter changed anything, but because it did not. There are apologies that arrive with enough truth to reopen the wound but not enough time to heal it. She folded the letter and placed it in a small box with the Blue Ridge photo, the old garden sketch, and one dried white flower she had eventually picked up from the hallway after leaving the bouquet outside all night. She did not keep these things as an invitation back. She kept them because pretending the love had been fake would have been another lie, and she was done surviving through edited truth. Later that afternoon she walked past Ion's shop on the way home. Buckets of yellow flowers stood outside, bright against the gray sidewalk. Marisol stopped. For a long moment she only looked. Then she went inside and bought a small bunch of yellow ranunculus, paying full price though Ione tried to refuse. No apology, no crisis, no suitcase, no man afraid at the door. She carried them home, trimmed the stems, filled a glass jar with water, and placed them on the kitchen table in the morning light. The room did not become healed. The flowers did not fix the years. They did not answer the nights she had waited, the exhibitions he had missed, the hotel room she never used, the box she had packed and unpacked until leaving became less a threat than a mercy. They were only flowers, alive, because someone had chosen them before they were needed as proof. Marisol opened the window. Cold air moved in, lifting the edge of Dorian's letter where it sat on the counter before she put it away. She stood in the small apartment, alone and still not whole, but no longer vanishing to be found. Outside, Asheville carried on with its wet streets, brick walls, and stubborn ivy. Inside, the yellow flowers held their shape in the quiet. This time they had come while she was still here. The thought did not make her smile, not at first. It simply stood there with her, plain and unsentimental, beside the jar of flowers and the folded letter, while the day moved on without needing anyone to almost lose her before deciding she was worth seeing.